Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the webinar series here at the Edtech School of Management. I'm your host. My name is Deva Rangarajan, and I'm a professor here. Right? Today, we have a special guest, somebody who's not the typical run-of-the-mill speaker that we have here, but somebody who comes from a very, very relevant background in terms of understanding how in the world of education, and especially what are all the things happening in the world in higher education, what are some trends, what are the expectations of candidates? What are the expectations of companies that want to recruit these candidates? And what roles can educational institutions play in trying to shape all of this environment as well? So I have Luca Fasan, who is actually a portfolio manager at Sycomore Asset Management. Luca, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks a lot for having me today. If I can start with just like 2 words of who I am and what I do. So as you were saying before, I am not the usual kind of like person that speaks in this kind of event. I'm an investor, so I've been working on investment all my career. I invest in equity, listed equities. I do that for mostly for pension fund or for institution. And my last role is to run a thematic fund on education. So it's a sustainable fund, and what we do, our mission is to invest in companies that increase the quality and accessibility of education. So we invest in companies that are providing education services. We invest in companies that are providing services who gets educated. And we invest in companies that are sponsoring education services. They can be towards their own employee or could be external, so clients, supplier, or the community in which they are involved. It's an extremely interesting thematic. It's new when it comes down to investment because we didn't have a lot of companies listed on the global markets that were providing education services up to 2, 3, 4 years ago. But as you know better than me, it's an extremely large market. It's $6 trillion, and it's growing ahead of GDP, and that's why, as an investor, I'm interested in the education thematic.
Fantastic. I think it's really great, right, Luca, because from your name and from your accent, you are a global citizen, but you're originally from Italy, and you went to school in Bocconi, right? And you have Bocconi, which is a premier educational institution, right? So when you talk about educational services, do you also typically include education's institutions like us, or do you consider us dinosaurs in the way we look at teaching and stuff like that? And are there very innovative players out there that we should be concerned about?
No, I don't consider you dinosaurs at all, actually. And yes, yeah, I'm Italian, but I've been living in the UK for 14 years, and then I moved to France recently. So that's why my accent is so strange in some ways.
It's wonderful.
No, absolutely not. So first of all, when we talk about education nowadays, we don't talk about students alone. We talk about the whole life of the individual. So we will need to be educated while we're young. I saw, for example, a really interesting company that are talking about like doing courses for under 10 to teach under 10 how to behave in a digital world. You know, that's the way in which the market is moving. And then we go to university. That's a big part of the individual life. And then we have a master. And after that, we will probably need to be reskilled. We will probably need to develop new skills or to improve our skill. And that's the way in which the world is changing. And we can talk about that later.
Absolutely.
So when it comes down to higher university, I think there are a couple of interesting trends today. So the first one is what's going on in US. So the US market have seen negative enrollment for 3 years in a row. And this is
you're talking about education institutions, right? Negative enrollment in higher education
institutions. So we're talking about university, college, and so far, so on. And this is the first time that we have this kind of event, or at least in the last 40 years. And so there'll be a lot of questions asked about what's going on there. Well, obviously, we had the pandemic in the middle. And what the pandemic taught us is that, yes, you can move education online. It becomes more accessible. it becomes also cheaper. So it becomes actually easy for more people to do some courses online, but the human experience of going to university is extremely important. So we can say that part of this negative enrollment was due to the fact that people were postponing going to university because university wasn't in person, and that's the first thing that we learned. So we have to say, even coming from a technological kind of background like I have, I used to invest only in tech companies, that you can't move all education online tomorrow. That doesn't work. You know, the relationship, the human relationship between the teacher and the student is crucial and extremely important. And also the life experience of moving from home, going to university is really important. But, and there is this trend when you look what's going on under the numbers. So who is not going to university? The interesting thing is that are white male, mostly in US, they are going to university less. And there are two reasons for that. The first one is that the job market in US has never been as strong as now. And there are jobs available, not only for white male, but in many cases, they get paid a little bit better. And people are deciding to go to work instead of going to university. That's the first thing. The second thing is that people they don't need to go to university. For example, women, the participation of women in university is increasing. The participation of minorities in US university is increasing. Because in this category, the need for higher education is really important. If you want to make a step in your life, you want to change, coming from an unprivileged background, change your life, you need to get educated. In the case of white male, what is missing now is the relationship between the value that you get from the university and what you can do with your diploma or with your like certification. And that's particularly in US, because US we had a really long period in which education fees has been growing ahead of inflation. And we can go into the reason for that. But nowadays, when you finish your 4 years or 3 years of university, you are sitting on a big pile of debt.
Yeah.
And people are starting to think about what's the value of this debt that I have now. Can I find a job that's going to help me out to pay back really quickly? And if I can, what's going to happen to me? And that's more or less what's going on. So I think that's the most interesting thing. In the rest of the world, there is still a massive market for higher education, especially in emerging markets. As I was saying before, the fact that lots of universities are going digital is helping mostly people from emerging markets to be able to attend university. So it's creating a new market. And we can see that digital or virtual, like a university, are still like a double-digit growth. So that's mostly thanks to people that will probably not be able to go to university without this digital opportunity, or because they don't live near a university, or because they have to work. And you know, the digital education gives the opportunity to people that they need to work, they are not living near, to be able to have a higher education. I think that's another thing that's really interesting, another trend that's really interesting.
Look, if I can just briefly interrupt you there, right? It's very interesting you talk about this. Do you see a difference? Let's say, for example, in the US, right? You're looking at working people who want to go and work rather than go to universities. Kind of makes sense. You don't want to get debt, makes sense. But for the minorities, education is a way for them to actually get a job that they would like to have. Now, to what extent do you think that in the rest of the world that education is maybe not as expensive as in the US, but at the same time, most emerging countries, especially there, they want to have access to education from the West or established places, right? Do you see that is also now triggering more and more enrollments from typically emerging countries into wanting a university degree? And so you see a dichotomy that you have more private non-educational institutions providing education in the so-called West or the developed countries, and a demand for more standard education in the more, let's say, for example, Eastern countries or the developing countries?
Yeah, we can say that. There is definitely a growing demand for, especially for higher education in emerging markets.
Yeah.
And they look for brand. So, for example, like a Western brand works really well in emerging markets. If you are launching a new class, a new course, or a full degree. And that's because, rightly or wrong, what is really important for them is that they can recognize the brand and they can use the brand sometimes to move. So that's a thing that's important in this case, in this situation. We are also seeing actually local investor investing in university, new chain university, specific to a certain area in which there is a shortage. There is a company, I don't remember the name now, is actually doing that in Africa, starting from South Africa, an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur with a few leaders are actually going north and trying to create a university all over Africa. Because one other thing is interesting is that we are going to have a massive shortage of skills going forward. And everybody, and that's what we want to talk later on, when we talk what is needed by corporation. All the corporation asking themselves, where are we going to find the talent that we need? And the first thing that you do, you look for demographic. The demographic of emerging markets is much better. There is nothing to say about that. You have a younger population, so you need to find a way in which these younger population are going to be educated. Because we know that we will need more skills that are not available today, and that we are going to have an increased need of all these skills going forward. The World Economic Forum put out this amazing data. They said that practically through because of automation, between 2020 and 2025, they do expect 90 million job, 85 million job to disappear. But in the same period, they also expect 97 new jobs, 97 million new jobs. And those all require different skill, new skills.
Wonderful.
So there is the need for emerging markets to be more educated, and there is the demand from people in emerging markets to get educated.
Fantastic. Now let's go into, let's say, for example, there are different stakeholders, right? If you try and take a look at the education market, it's like an ecosystem, right? An ecosystem consisting of students, of educational institutions, and the workforce that employs them, right? So if you try and if we break down each one of these, right? So can you tell me what are the new demands or the new trends happening, especially when it comes to the student population, right? So let's say, and if we can just talk, because we can talk on forever, but in the higher education market, the trends you see from students.
So when it comes down to students, what the students are losing is not the faith, but they see less value rather than in the past when it comes down to the 4 years degree. So, and that's because there is a different kind of attitude from corporation. So the 4 years degree that we did was a proof that we can actually get ourselves in a position to study a shows effort for 4 years. The notion that we got were obviously really important, but probably weren't the one that then we used on the job market.
Indeed.
So the value of what we were doing was more on the fact that we actually show people that we can challenge ourselves, reach our target, and finish the university. Nowadays, especially new generation, are really focused on getting those skills that are necessary to do the job that they want to do at the end. So they are more interested in short-term courses and shorter courses that actually are giving them the opportunity to do a particular kind of like a job that they really want to do. So that's the first change that we're seeing from a student point of view. And I'm not saying that the degree are going to disappear. It's never going to happen. But we see that there is more demand for a degree that have relevance, okay,
Yeah.
or at least relevance for the students. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the students want the opportunity to have education at least on a hybrid mode. Okay, so they don't want full online. There are all the universities are moving full online now.
Yeah.
There are categories we were talking before that they need full online, but normal kind of students want something that is kind of like in the middle. They want the experience of university. They want they want to be able to use technology. They want to be able to study at home, to do some classes at home, something that is in the middle. And so it's truly important that the institution adapt to have the students. And from what I see, most institutions are doing that in different ways. There are institutions that are creating their own platform, institutions are working with the players that are helping with the platform, but they're all moving towards what the students are asking. And then the other thing that is interesting, they want when it comes down to corporation, what a corporation wants is a certification.
Yeah.
So it's not a degree anymore. The degree in the past was certifying that we were able to work hard.
Yeah.
Now they want certification that certify that you have that skills.
That's
and there is a new market. There is a new market, a really interesting thing in thinking now about how are we going to be able to carry this certification in a digital world. How do I put all my skills in something that is shareable and tangible? So something that I can send to employers just to show that I can do that job. So it's those are the other trends I think are really interesting. So the way which you see institution like yours is actually adapting to this, is creating some shorter courses.
Yeah,
being the place in which the students can go back even after finishing.
Exactly. Yeah, indeed.
And important, creating like a trust kind of a relationship with your students, and be the institution that can help them not just when they are at school or university, but even after. A place in which you can go back and say, I need to develop this now, and where I can do that. Oh, my university was really good at doing that. Let me go back there and see if I can.
Indeed, that's very, very interesting, right? So this, I do hear, because even in the educational institution space, there are some that are more focused on trying to provide education, which is continuing education. That is, they go and help companies set up education, whereas majority of the educational institutions are much more geared towards training the students either for a 3-year degree or a 4-year degree for the most part, right? So from what I'm hearing you say is that for those kind of institutions, if I want to have more and more practical skills, essentially what you're saying is that also provide some short-term courses that is also very relevant, maybe engage with industry. That's what I'm taking away from what you're saying in terms of doing that as well. But what about very traditional courses? Do you think that in the future, let's say, for example, history, geography, and things like that, do you think that those would disappear in the fact that if you're looking only at practical things and stuff like that? So where do you think in terms of education, or are those the kind of things which should pretty much go hybrid, you know what I mean? And more face-to-face is on applicable skills.
No, I don't think they're going to disappear, because I think there is a trend going on in society at the moment that's extremely interesting, in which we are seeing like a polarization of the skills that are required. So if you think like 10 years down the road, when automation will be like in full mode, what the human we will be able, or actually we will be asked to do. And there are two things that we will ask to do. One is actually make the machine work, like coding. Everything is actually related to science. So you have everything that you are studying today, physics, science, math, it's going to be relevant forever. Coding, all these kind of things. But on the other side, what is going to be asked, what is going to be needed are soft skills. And the soft skill, you develop soft skill studying philosophy, geography, history, all these kind of things. So I don't think, even if there is a demand for your courses that give you like a skills that you can use tomorrow on the job market is not going there. The job market is creating two really like a diverse pot of new jobs. One requires science and analytical skills. The other one requires soft skills. So we will need both. So
Both
I
indeed.
don't think
Very
don't
nice.
think the university should stop or
And I love
will
this.
stop to do
Indeed.
that. Those are the two things that actually for me, I'm really interested. For example, and I was reading an article today, one of the conundrum when it comes down to artificial intelligence is the ethics of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So you don't need only the developer that is able to create the code that teach a machine to think about something and solve problems that are complex. You also need someone that can understand if the machine is doing it in an ethical way.
Yeah.
And those requires completely different skills. You can do that if you're an engineer.
Indeed. So now moving on. So essentially, you touched upon the participants in these programs. You kind of connected it to the fact that industry wants people with certain skill sets and certification and stuff like that. But are there any other specific things that industry looks for at the educational providers, right? When I mean educational providers, no, I'm not restricting myself to people in traditional universities. I'm thinking of every other institution that we compete with, right? Let's say, for example, you could have a company like Deloitte, have Deloitte University, right? You could have all of our non-traditional companies where we actually sent our students to, now are beginning to compete with us because they're more in touch with the side of the customer. So you see that happening. So in terms of requirements, from what do industries and companies look for from education institutions? Now, please don't restrict yourself to universities, but educational institutions in general.
They are looking for partnership, and I'll explain you why. Because we are experiencing the Great Resignation in the US. So we have people in their 60s that are leaving the workforce, and we are seeing less people going straight to work. There are new jobs that we kind of like struggle to count. So we have this also problem like on the data. So and we, as we were saying before, we have a lack of skills. So what companies are trying to do is to create a path, learning path inside the company. And those have like two extremely important benefits. The first one is that obviously you created the competencies that you need. And if you're struggling to find outside, you need to do it inside. And the second thing is that you create trust in your employee. Your employee wants to work in a place that gives them the opportunity to continue to develop and improve. Okay. And but companies are not able to do that by themselves. As you were saying, we saw university, but also many other institutions like the Edtech institution, the Coursera of this world. All these companies, they started from like short courses online in partnership with university most of the time, because the content is always coming from university. Most of the content, not all the content, but most of the content. And they need someone that helps them to create path that their employee can use. They need to be paths that are innovative, they create the right skills, and they help on one side the corporation, the company to achieve their target, and on the other side, extremely important, they help the employee to achieve their target. Because I was reading a really interesting research recently published by one of these consulting firms. It wasn't Deloitte, it was one of the others. And one thing they were saying is that if the last 10 years, they've been the years in which success was driven by putting the consumer at the center of what you were doing. Most of the companies that have been extremely successful in the last 10 years were companies that were helping us as consumer to have an easy life. Amazon, you know, I don't need to go to the shop. You know, you are actually saving me time and money, and that's the only thing that I need. They were saying that the next 10 years, we'll see the success of the company that are able to take care of their own employees. Because talent will become so scarce going forward that if you're able to nurture talent inside of your companies or corporation, you will have a different kind of path to success relative to the others. And you know, I kind of it's you know, it's probably like 3-5 years down the line where we're gonna get there. But I understand why they're saying this kind of thing.
Indeed. Very interesting indeed. So you're right, because for a firm to keep your customer and solve your customer problems. If you don't have employees, you're screwed, right? So even
Yes.
your ability to actually take care of your customers is
Yeah.
not going to happen if you're not going to be, oh, wow. So I did not even think about it. And I've been in the education space for 20 years. I work with executives, but I don't necessarily think like, okay, you need to be investing in your employees. Yeah, it's there in the back of my mind, but putting it so prominently in the front brings attention to that fact. And I think that's right. So I think that also then is connected to the great resignation or the big quit in terms of what wow. So essentially what you're saying is that those companies that invest in their employees are the ones that are more likely to be successful. Wonderful, great. So they have a learning path. What about, is it just about the learning path? But I also hear a lot about the fact that you know that the skill sets that you said that yourself, right? The skill sets needed are changing, right? Not every company has the luxury of letting go all of its employees and then bring in new employees for the new capability. Right? So how, in your opinion, are companies dealing with it, and what are educational institutions doing to actually help in this process?
So there are a different kind of level of ways in which companies can deal with that. So if you take like the IT services industry, for example, so consultant in IT, they are extremely good in dealing with that because they started to have a shortage of engineer with digital skills like 5-6 years ago, because there are not enough engineers in the world. You know, it's kind of like, even if India is producing over 1 million of engineers every year, there is a shortage of engineers that is getting like wider and wider. Okay. And especially there is a shortage of people with digital skills because they didn't teach in the university 7 years ago. And so the way in which they are doing that is constantly retraining a quarter of a company. When you think about that, the complexity of having people doing the job and getting retrained constantly, it's not easy to manage. And they had to become extremely good at doing that. So they're constantly retraining like a quarter of the company, some of them even more than that, just to keep always the skill updated. Now, this is also easier because you have a clear target. So you know what your client needs, and so you know what you need to teach your employee to continue to be. What is actually we are seeing is even also for a social kind of reason, lots of companies, for example, are deciding not to go through a restructuring process. These are like a few examples. Banks, okay? Banks have a massive problem because the branches are closing, okay? And we know that. So they used to have 20, 25 people per branch. Now they have 7 if they are lucky, and they have less branches than before. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of employees. But they have a requirement for different kind of like employee in all the other divisions for which they are struggling to find the right skills. So we are seeing more and more banks that instead of doing massive redundancy program, and sometimes with the help of government, they are sponsoring reskilling and whatsoever, trying to move as many people as they can internally from one side to the other, you know, because it's cheaper. As you were saying before, you know, the luxury of, getting rid of half of your company, find a new half that is going to be perfect for the job that you have. It doesn't work like that. In corporation, especially, if you started to go through like a series of restructuring products or restructuring program, you lose the trust of your employee, you lose the trust of your clients often, and you lose the trust of the market. So you need to find a way to go around and do it like in a proactive way. And that's why I think we are seeing more and more that are working that. And what is extremely important from your point of view is that content is always coming from institutions like yours. So the only thing is that you need to find a way in which you vehicle your content towards the corporation and inside the corporation. But the content, that's like the only bottleneck, real bottleneck that you have in all of these kind of things. Because distribution is easy. We have technology to do that. We have platform, we have system, we have marketplace. We have everything that you need. What you really need is good content. Good content that can be used by the end user. And it could be like students, it could be like employee, it could be whatever.
Fantastic. Luca, one of the things, when we began, I was not even thinking about this, right? But do policymakers also have something to keep in mind? Because I was just talking about the ecosystem consisting of, the typical universities, the students, and the companies. But obviously, from what you're saying, this can become a societal problem, right? This can become a societal issue if you don't tackle this. And so, essentially, where, in your opinion, right? And in your opinion, where should what is society, but you know what I mean, the regulatory bodies or the powers that be or the policymakers, what should they be also thinking about when they want to try and influence educational institutions as well to be much more in tune with the needs of the markets?
So in US, for example, when it comes down to community college, the President Biden has like a massive plan for revamp the whole community college experience, because they find out at the end that they weren't actually fit for purpose for the skills that people wanted to develop. So that's one thing. So we're seeing the government being more and more active. Also, we had the problem of the pandemic that created a massive learning gap, especially in the younger generation.
Yes, yeah.
And that's another thing which government are working on. And they're trying to do that in a really difficult kind of environment, because the biggest crisis in education for the next 10 years is that we're not going to have enough teachers. The lack of teachers. So you're trying to close a gap in knowledge, especially in early years. And you need to do that without having enough teachers to do that. And then when it comes down to the fact that we are seeing government open to sponsor private provider of education. For example, in US, the way which it works is that all the schools have been, all the district, because the money comes from top to the end, all the district are getting money from the government. They need to invest the money to close the knowledge gap that's been created by the pandemic. So first they try to hire a new teacher, they don't find them. Then what they do, they hire a tutoring company, so a private company that tutors the kids in school. So you have all this kind of thing, because the top priority of government, education is always one of the priority of government. But now government are realizing that that's the place in which they should focus more attention, and the time is now, because it's one of the main reasons why countries are successful is the general level of education of the country. And because we are seeing signs, especially in developing markets, like in US, the people are losing faith on the power of education. That's when the government needs to act. And then there are also like social, obviously like a social aspect, because non-educated part of the country, they are usually likely to increase of violence, increase of, there are
social unrest.
Social unrest. So I can say that I never saw like governments so active in terms of trying to figure it out what to do. It's early days; they're not doing everything right. But they, at least they know exactly that there is something that they need to work towards. That is extremely important. But they went as far. Sorry, the last thing. They went as far as thinking about canceling all the students debt in US. So they are discussing in US to cancel all the student debt. Because they understand that affordability, for example, it's a big problem for US citizens. And so they think if we give like a strong message that we are never going to let the situation to go where we are today, which students debt the second largest pool of debt in the US. And we're never going to get there again because we're going to help you out. And we give a strong message. By definition, we are also like reassuring people that education is the path to take.
So one of the last couple of questions I have for you, Luca, is you talk about, not now, sometime 10 years back, there was this Edtech and stuff like that. They were talking about MOOCs. You already talked about Coursera, like the massive online open courses and stuff like that. Do you think that initially MOOCs were offered by universities, right? But now you have more and more Edtech companies. And hence, I'm assuming that that's also part of your job, that when you try and see where you want to be investing as a portfolio manager, right? Essentially, you're also looking at. So tell me about how big of an industry is all these edtech companies? And you even have a term edtech. The other day I was contacted by a person saying edtech, how they can help university professors actually do a better job and stuff like that. So what is the growth of edtech? You know what I mean? Can you briefly say how they're growing, and should we be looking at them as a threat as a university or as a partner?
So the $6 trillion, which was talking before, let's say the edtech before the pandemic was just over 2%. It was pretty small, and now is around 3, and we expect to go to 5 by 2025. And the growth is double digit. It's like 16%, I believe. There is a company that collects all the data. It's called Online IQ, and they do all the data around like edtech. Now it's a large market, and it's interesting because there are many different services. So when it comes down to, as you were saying, edX and now it's part of 2U. So edtech has the same problem that education institution have. The brand. You need to be recognizable as a brand. Now, and you can create that having the right partnership. So Coursera, for example, with the right university. So practically the course that you are creating, sponsored and helped by that university that's really popular, you take the course, and then in years, because it actually took years, Coursera becomes the brand and the university, the sponsor provided it. And 2U, for example, that is the owner of edX now, didn't have the brand, because what they were doing were helping university to go online. And the reason why we did the acquisition is because they wanted to have a brand that was recognizable. And that's so in that sense, the main issue for edtech today is to create a brand that is recognizable. Because they all start with consumer. So all this business, what they do, they start with the short courses for consumer or market, as we were saying before. But the way in which you monetize this is through degree one side, corporation on the other. Those are the two ways. Because consumer to keep consumer to continue to come to your platform, you need to have free courses. You need to be able to attract them really quickly, because if you have to use social media to recruit, your business model is never going to be profitable. So you have this massive problem. So you need to have a brand that is recognizable.
But Luca, and this is my last question. I know that I've taken already too much of your time, but take a look at Google, right? So for example, Google is so big. Google decides to offer courses. There's no need for a university at all. Google has a brand recognition by itself, right? Is that something that you'll see more and more as well? Because essentially, if let's say you're Google certified, for example, right? So any other company that wants to recruit you, the purpose of certification and doing that is to actually get a job, right? As for the most part. So if you have these well-known, if I'm getting Coursera and I have done a set of string of courses, and essentially it's basically a string of professors not associated with one university, but across many, but you get the skills necessary. And you reach a point where a company says, you have these courses from Coursera, it's enough. So if you look at it from that perspective, right? So what is the future, right? In terms of saying that should we as education should become more flexible in how we offer things, you know what I mean? Or should we become more innovative in the kind of content that we do so that we're always cutting edge?
I think they should become more flexible and innovative. The Google example is great. And I tell you something, do you know who is the largest provider of courses with certification in the world? It's Microsoft. And that's because if you want to run a server, you need to have a Microsoft certification. Now, this is not the whole market, but for especially for digital hard skills, the short courses certification works extremely well because you have skills that can be are like stackable, as they say, and provable. So obviously Google, Microsoft, even Facebook, they do like courses on what you should know and do exactly to use their platform or to use that environment. So in that kind of specific field, these things works extremely well. Now, I don't think, actually, I'm pretty sure about that. None of them, Microsoft is different because they own LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is going into like the all courses kind of company. So they have a different path there.
Yeah.
When you look at Google, the only reason why Google did it is that there was no one else who was doing it. If Google is saying, we can do it for you, we can, because for them, they will be probably happy to say, okay, let's
because there's no cost
do it
indeed.
for us. Yeah. So the idea is that, yes, you need to be innovative because they're going to be like the next Google and the next Microsoft in different kind of business. And they will need someone that will help them to do that. And they will need like a partner that is technologically advanced on one side, but that has a content that they need. So yes, there is definitely a growing market. It's not substituting, it's creating something new that in some cases is extremely specific to the subsector or to the industry, but it's definitely something that as an education institution, they will need to go and check and see if they can do that in their market. As I was saying before, the only thing in which Edtech are a little bit forward, or like one step ahead relative to like higher education, is the fact that they are really active in creating partnership with corporation, being part of the corporation, because it's a feedback kind of thing. So you ask L'Oreal what you need. Or in your case, that's what you do when you're doing all these courses on salespeople. What you need, and when you know what they need, you provide them with the content that they need. And you need to create that kind of relationship. I think that's it. For some sector, we are seeing competition, but I think the competition is only coming from the fact that it wasn't there before, and it was easy for them to develop.
Yeah, indeed. So, well, absolutely. So if tomorrow Luca has to choose between investing for his clients in an educational institution like Bocconi or ESEG and things like that, as against an EdTech company, how would Luca make his decision on saying where I would be investing in?
So the idea is that you need to understand which is the value of the asset.
Yeah.
Okay? So for me, that's crucial, because the technology, you can buy it or you can develop it. And what we're talking about, like distributors. So people that are helping the students to arrive to the content. For me, what is crucial is the quality of the content, the relevancy of the content, and the power of the brand. Because the power of the brand helps to attract students, and the quality of the content keeps the student in. So that's one thing extremely that I think is. When it comes down to Edtech, there are few new technology that I think are extremely interesting, like the use of AI in education to help to understand, create like a personalized path for different students. So that's, I think it's really, really important. The digitalization of the experience in class, even in class. So when you are in class and you have a digital device, you and the teacher can follow progress. So these parts, so the digitalization of the experience in the class is another part that I think is extremely interesting. But when it comes down to content or distributors, I think brand and quality of the content. Those are the two things that are relevant, really relevant for me, because the quality content is difficult to develop, and a brand is really difficult
to build. Indeed. Well, Luca, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us. And again, as I said, from my usual talking with people in sales and everything else, this is a different experience talking to an expert, taking a look just not at us as an education institution, but different educational institutions that are trying to, again, address the same issues, right? Helping meet the needs of certain clients that can help make society better as well. Thank you so much, Luca, for taking the time to talk.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
All right.